It was a real relief to have done it. I mean, one of the biggest problems, not just for me, but for everybody, is at the end of the Hail to the Thief thing, we completely lost all our confidence. It was a weird experience, a weird feeling, deeply unpleasant.
The huge worldwide success of OK Computer raised the profile of Radiohead to the extent that its members were now much in demand for collaborations. In 1997, Thom contributed to the all-star Uncle project, helmed by Mo Wax label boss James Lavelle. Yorke sang vocals on a track with one of his all-time musical heroes and a big influence on the methodology behind OK Computer, DJ Shadow. Shadow was a San Francisco-based recording artist whose breathtaking cut-ups and sonic collages had led him to being described as the Jimmy Page of the sampler. His collaboration with Yorke, recorded while Radiohead were in San Francisco on the OK Computer tour, was a dark, haunting piece entitled Rabbit in Your Headlights, and was universally considered the highlight of the much-anticipated science fiction LP, released on Mo Wax in 1998. The track was released as a single despite being too long to be eligible for the charts, but the disturbing video in which an anonymous figure was repeatedly knocked down by cars while walking through a tunnel attracted much airplay and attention. Radiohead's support act for part of the OK Computer tour were the American band Sparklehorse, who blended alternative country, indie rock, psychedelia and elements of lo-fi electronica to startling effect. Thom sang with the band on the EMI Covers compilation Come Again, on a version of Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here. His vocal part was recorded down a phone line into the studio. Thom and Jonny Greenwood both contributed to the soundtrack of Todd Haynes' idiosyncratic and unconventional movie tribute to the glam rock era, Velvet Goldmine. Michael Stipe was the film's soundtrack producer, and assorted combinations of contemporary musicians were arranged into temporary and fictional glam rock bands in order to record cover versions of early 70s glitter and art rock hits. Thus, Thom and Jonny joined Suede's Bernard Butler and drummer Paul Kimball in the Venus in Furs, recording the early Roxy Music tracks Ladytron, 2HB and Bittersweet. Thom providing a spot-on approximation of Brian Ferry's languorous croon. The band also backed the film's star Jonathan Rhys-Meyers on a version of Brian Eno's Babies on Fire. In April 1998, the Anglo-Brazilian band Drugstore reached number 20 in the UK singles charts with their song El Presidente, a duet between singer Isabel Monteiro and Thom Yorke. Yorke also contributed to several more tracks on the parent album White Magic for Lovers, but following the end of the epic OK Computer promotional trek in late 1998, Thom Yorke was a burnt-out case. He later described New Year's Eve 1998 as the lowest point in his life, where whenever he picked up a guitar and tried to write, he would get the horrors and was compulsively destroying anything he committed to paper. Suffering from depression and writer's block, Thom was unable to bring any new material to the first sessions for Radiohead's fourth album in January 1999. All he knew was that he wanted to move completely away from the epic rock behemoth that Radiohead had become, and that their old writing methods of jamming new songs together in a room was not going to work. "I'd completely had it with melody," he told Q magazine the following year. "I just wanted rhythm. All melodies to me were pure embarrassment." The first thing that Thom had done upon returning home from tour was to buy the entire back catalogue of the Sheffield-based electronica label Warp. He absorbed more experimental contemporary electronic music through listening to The John Peel Show on Radio 1 and began ordering records by the artists who caught his attention on the internet. After 2 years touring OK Computer, Thom Yorke never wanted to listen to guitar-based rock ever again. Minimalist electronic composers like Ortega and the Aphex Twin were where he was finding his inspiration, and they pointed to a way out of his current creative cul-de-sac. The rest of the band took a while to come round to Thom's way of thinking. Radiohead, for all their experimentation, were a band built around no less than 3 guitars, bass and drums. There is no doubt that the resulting record, 2000's Kid A, was very much Thom Yorke's baby, more so than anything else the band had done. Reactions from press and public alike were mixed. Many felt that Radiohead had copped out of the challenge of following up OK Computer by recording a deliberately uncommercial, arty and experimental album that avoided the question of whether they could top their previous effort. Others, including the aforementioned DJ John Peel, who had never succumbed to Radiohead's appeal in the past, considered it their best work. Dismayed by his ability to sing the phone book and make it sound heartbreakingly emotive, Thom compressed and treated his voice on Kid A to make it sound cold and inhuman. Arguably, though, the results are even more affecting than usual, with the sparse, wintry backings allowing his vocals the space to fully convey an ambiguous sense of isolation and loss. Around this time, Thom also duetted with another unconventional and uniquely talented vocalist, Bjork, on her soundtrack to the Lars von Trier film Dancer in the Dark. Bjork starred in this film, the first and so far last Dogme musical, and also recorded a soundtrack album, Selma Songs, on which Thom joins her to sing the track I've Seen It All, although his contribution doesn't appear in the film version. He also collaborated with PJ Harvey on her 2000 LP Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea, duetting with Polly Jean on the song This Mess We're In and singing backing vocals on Beautiful Feeling, as well as One Line. Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea won the 2001 Mercury Music Prize, beating Radiohead's follow-up to Kid A, Amnesiac. Generally seen as two sides of the same project, Kid A and Amnesiac were recorded more or less simultaneously, with the marginally more commercial and guitar-orientated tracks held back for the latter album. Amnesiac was dedicated to Thom and Rachel's son Noah, born at the end of 2000. But if anyone thought that fatherhood would mellow Thom Yorke, they had another thing coming.
I was there to help the cause of the Friends of the Earth and the global warming campaign, and then he started, he was making a series of statements which made it blatantly obvious there was no point in meeting with him because he was going to go down the nuclear route, and he thought that economic growth is the number one priority and blah blah blah. So all the preparatory work we'd done, or Friends of the Earth had done in meeting him, was completely invalid. And at the same time, they wanted to bring me in, or his people wanted to bring me in and talk me through the whole process, the subtext of which being is, of course, if you leave the meeting and are derogatory about the meeting and say that nothing was gained, then you've forfeited the access for Friends of the Earth to the Prime Minister, which normally I read as blackmail.
The first overt example of Thom Yorke's increasing politicisation was when Radiohead played at the Tibetan Freedom Concert in New York in 1997, alongside the Beastie Boys, R.E.M., U2, as well as Patti Smith. Thom was particularly vocal in condemning the ongoing Chinese occupation of Tibet and the concurrent cultural and religious repression, saying everyone knows what the Chinese are doing, but no one will just stand up and say, "You must stop." He went on to accuse world governments of having their hands tied by global corporations, a concern that he would voice more loudly in the years to come. As the Tibetan Freedom Concert became an annual event, so Radiohead returned to support the cause on several more occasions. They also performed at Amnesty International's 50th birthday celebrations in Paris, and in 1999, Thom became heavily involved in the Jubilee 2000 campaign to cancel out Third World debt, although Radiohead were conspicuously absent from the 2005 Live 8 concert, which Thom would later dismiss as a convenient sideshow and a distraction from the real issues. While touring OK Computer, Radiohead had increasingly felt as though they were in danger of being eaten alive by the rapacious capitalist money-making machine. The publication of Naomi Klein's best-selling anti-globalization polemic No Logo in 2000 was a major influence on the writing of Kid A and the band's subsequent tent tour, in which no corporate brand name, sponsorship or advertising would be allowed. Instead, the band's artwork and projections lent support to the global anti-capitalism movement. And such themes became more prominent in Thom's lyrics and interviews as well. In 2002, Thom and Ed were among the 100,000-strong crowd gathered outside Parliament to demand greater justice in global trade, giving numerous interviews for the cause, and Radiohead donated a short film to the environmental campaign group Friends of the Earth, for whom Thom would become an official spokesman. He's spoken often of his environmental concern, his opposition to the Iraq War, and his virulent contempt for virtually all First World political leaders, British PM Tony Blair in particular. Radiohead's most overt political statement, however, was the title of their 2003 album, Hail to the Thief, an explicit reference to the popular belief that George W. Bush had stolen the American elections by rigging the polls. The album cover featured a mind-numbing array of empty media soundbites, advertising slogans and political doublespeak, which Thom said was inspired by listening constantly to Radio 4 and writing down the phrases that stuck in his head. It is a mark of Radiohead's broad appeal, however, that despite their willful experimentalisation and outspoken political stance, they are still loved by those they've set themselves up in direct opposition to. In a Blair-like bid to change the image of his party to a more youthful, hip and with-it bunch of guys, the new leader of the Conservative Party, David Cameron, repeatedly named Radiohead as one of his favourite bands throughout 2005, alongside other equally unlikely candidates like the Smiths. And in 2006 he picked Fake Plastic Trees as one of his selections on the Radio 4 programme Desert Island Discs. Furthermore, he claimed that the band had recently invited him to one of their concerts and that he'd specifically asked if they could play that track, which they had done. Cameron stopped just short of suggesting that the band dedicated the number to him, but the implication of mutual admiration was there. Thom, of course, saw it all rather differently. The gig was actually a benefit and awareness-raising concert for Friends of the Earth, the Big Ask held at London's Coco nightclub. Thom and Johnny had played as a duo, and as an official ambassador for Friends of the Earth, Thom had written to the leaders of all three major political parties, although he'd contacted Gordon Brown rather than Tony Blair, inviting them to the show. He denied that the set list for the night was influenced by any requests and said they would have played Fake Plastic Trees anyway. There was similar embarrassment when George W. Bush's daughter Jenna turned up at a Radiohead show at New York's Madison Square Gardens, despite the band's outspoken antipathy towards her father. She was accompanied by a squad of burly security men who unsubtly cleared a path for her to the front of the stage. Thom later commented that his people had wisely decided not to tell him who was in the building before they went on. Of course, the media are always eager to pounce on stories such as this, looking for ways to embarrass the outspoken singer and puncture what they see as his aura of self-righteousness. But everyone who has principles is bound to fall down on them occasionally. It's to Thom's credit that he worries about the environmental impact of the band's touring, of huge stadium shows and festivals, even if he can't yet see a viable way around it. He's wary of politicians trying to use the band for their own ends, but he's also passionate about the causes he believes in and not afraid to stand up for them. He's more likely to be seen performing at an all-night vigil in support of the world's poorest workers or at an anti-war demonstration than hanging out in trendy clubs or restaurants. But, as he frankly told the BBC's Jon Snow while promoting the Big Ask concert, he still feels he's not doing enough. But then, none of us are.
I mean, it is as I wrote in the blog. I don't know how these things work. I'd love to know if she actually had a ticket. They came, 6 Secret Servicemen, to the show, and it's a good job no one told me beforehand. Well, I mean, we didn't know anything about it. I mean, all I remember talking to Phil about it afterwards, like, what was that fracas going on? Some guy being pushed around by Secret Service. I've since heard other stories about other gigs with the Bush daughters and Secret Service, but anyway, I'm not going to go into that.
On the 13th of May 2006, a week into Radiohead's first live dates for 2 years, a mysterious message appeared on the band's website. It was from Thom Yorke announcing that something has been kicking around in the background that I have not told you about. It's called The Eraser. I wrote and played it. It was fun and quick to do. The Eraser, it turned out, was not the new Radiohead album. That wasn't due until 2007 at the earliest, but a Thom Yorke solo project, which he'd been working on sporadically for the past 5 years. Thom was quick to say that Radiohead were not splitting up, that they were still working together and writing, but this was something, well, different. It was another chance for Thom to indulge his love of minimalist, purely electronic music, and some anticipated a return to the chilly techno textures of Kid A, the Radiohead album that many felt Thom had the most influence on. Thom had begun work in earnest on The Eraser after Radiohead's Hail to the Thief World Tour had wound up back in 2004. As always, the pressures of touring had exacted a gruelling physical and mental toll on the band, and their sensitive and somewhat frail singer most of all. He later said that he was bored with being part of this great, cumbersome thing called Radiohead, and that he almost felt like they were going through the motions, perpetuating the band because it was what was expected of them, rather than because they enjoyed it. He wanted to do something creative that wasn't Radiohead, and that wasn't what people expected from Radiohead. Thom had a bunch of sounds, beats and sketchy ideas that he'd been accumulating on his laptop, a continuation in a way of the glitchy electronica that fed into Kid A and Amnesiac at the start of the century. These were experimental and undeveloped, but with the encouragement and assistance of regular Radiohead producer Nigel Godrich, Yorke began writing songs around these fragmentary ideas, and The Eraser gradually began to take shape. Thom says that he played Godrich a CD of what he thought was just random crap, and Nigel convinced him that there were actually some good musical ideas in there that deserved to be turned into proper songs. Godrich was instrumental in putting Thom's ideas into shape, and the pair deliberately worked quickly on computers at his home studio, just the two of them, a method that was a refreshing change from the usual way of working with traditional instruments and a full band. Lyrically, the album was very much a reflection of the times it was written in and the simultaneously apocalyptic and hopeful worldview of its author. Thom became a father for the second time in 2004, and the album was dedicated to his daughter Agnes. But elsewhere, Harrow Down Hill dealt with the suicide of Government Weapons Inspector Dr. David Kelly during the inquiry into the Iraq War, while It Rained All Night imagined a biblical catastrophe in all too real terms, inspired by the flash floods at Boscastle in Cornwall in 2004. Yorke had been in the area along with his friend and artistic collaborator Stanley Donwood when the flooding occurred. Donwood had a book of German expressionist art with him at the time, and the sight of buildings and trees being ripped apart and the endless roar of the flood merged in his dreams with the strange expressionist woodcuts, inspiring a series of pictures of imaginary rain-splattered medieval disasters, which led eventually to the Eraser's cover art. For Thom, the Boscastle floods confirmed his worst fears for our environment and lent a new dreadful urgency to his writing. The album's title is a reference to the awesome, unpredictable and amoral power of nature that can sweep away our lives and our achievements in an instant. The song represents one man still screaming into the wind.
I recorded by the sea in the summertime, and then recorded in Nigel has a studio in London with a cocktail bar right next to it. It's nice. And we did a lot of work in the Radiohead studio as well.
Housed in a Stanley Donwood sleeve, depicting in German expressionist woodcut style a King Canute-like figure trying to hold back the waves that are washing away London in a biblical flood, The Eraser is, as predicted, an album of minimalist electronica, chilly tech jazz and laptop beats. The title track finds Thom singing in a soulful falsetto somewhere between Prince and Rufus Wainwright over a kind of stripped-back dysfunctional funk backing made up of softly skittering beats and chopped-up jazz piano chords. The lyrics play with themes of paranoia and alienation, Thom conducting a conversation with himself from one verse to the next, alternately playing the persecuted paranoid and the cynical manipulator. The song gradually builds into a fuzzy, lo-fi, neo-disco groove and then fades out as though suddenly thinking better of the idea. Analyze mixes a bright, gently ascending piano part with clanking subterranean beats to ominous blurred effect. The clock stutters and skips, neurotic tick-like beats and stumbling bass and keyboard bumping and falling over each other as Thom sings about time running out, occasionally harmonising with himself in an almost off-key fashion that only adds to the track's overall feeling of claustrophobia. Black Swan introduces gently plucked electric guitar to the mix for the first time, over a jazzy drum and bass backing. One of the album's catchiest and most accessible numbers, the swearing in the chorus automatically excludes it from radio play. Thom's tuneless humming opens Skip Divided over clicking and hissing sounds that suggest some kind of hospital life support machine. The half-spoken, increasingly unhinged vocals make this track even darker and more unsettling, despite the suggestion that it's actually some kind of love song. Atoms for Peace pays homage to Kraftwerk's Radioactivity album with its scratchy Geiger counter beats and warm retro-futuristic tones. With Thom singing in the soulful falsetto of the title track again, it's an oasis of relative peace and security amidst the fear and loathing expressed on either side. The atmosphere of imminent apocalypse returns with a vengeance on And It Rained All Night, a cinematic-sounding fable of biblical floods descending on modern-day New York. With its moody synthesizers and burbling bass, it's another of the album's more accessible numbers, despite the knitting needle beats and recurrent aura of submerged dread. Harrow Downhill is more dysfunctional funk, the combination of atmospheric synthesizers and chopped slap bass, lending it an oddly early 80s feel despite the dryly modern scattershot beats and topical lyrics that deal with the suicide of Dr. David Kelly. The urgent chorus of I'm coming home, we think the same things at the same time make this another quite accessible commercial-sounding number, despite the obvious anger being expressed. The last song, Cymbal Rush, starts out with minimalist or Tekka-like bleeps and beats before ascending gradually to a jazz head rush finale. The lyrics may be expressing a fear of, yet again, imminent apocalypse, death and destruction, but when the synthesizers start to build up midway through, there's something calmly beautiful and almost redemptive about the music. At just under 41 minutes in duration, The Eraser is not some grand musical statement or epic journey in sound, but as its low-key release suggested, Thom never wanted it to be seen as such. A continuation of the musical direction begun with Kid A, it's an experimental piece that nevertheless yields up moments of sublime, if harrowing, beauty.
The most frightening thing I find about what's going on at the moment is that no one is really engaging with the fact that we can't have endless growth. We can't endlessly consume as human beings. This is no longer like smelly hippies talking. Anybody who's got time to think about it should be thinking to themselves, well, hang on a minute, there's something fundamentally flawed in the way that we're proceeding. Most of us are still labouring under the illusion this is all going to happen in a couple of hundred years, and it's not. We're talking about 50 years.
Released on June the 10th, 2006 on XL Records, in a one-off deal following the end of Radiohead's contract with EMI, Thom says that The Eraser has got all his sitting at a laptop alone in his room tendencies in music making out of his system for a while. Meanwhile, early reports suggest that Radiohead's next album will be a return to more direct guitar-driven rock. Yet without a record deal, though, of course, there'll be no shortage of suitors when the band are ready. There's no urgent deadline, and Radiohead have never been the most self-motivated of bands when it comes to getting things done quickly. Perfectionism, indecision and endless experimentation can all too easily prevail. After completing The Eraser, Thom returned to studio sessions with the group. But the message on the band's website expressed his frustration at how slowly and painfully things were going, claiming he was tearing his hair out and cracking up. Business as usual in the Radiohead camp then. The 2006 European and UK tour, including headlining shows at the V Festival, saw several new songs being aired as well as others that were familiar live staples to ardent fans, but which the band had never recorded and were apparently still under consideration for the next album. Thom said that the influences on his writing at the moment included the Australian retro rock band Wolfmother, to whom he compared the work-in-progress Radiohead song Body Snatchers, and electro-dominatrix Peaches, who inspired a rewrite of a number called 15 Steps. Meanwhile, House of Cards recalled Fleetwood Mac's Albatross with its surprisingly warm, summery feel, compared by others to John Martyn or the Carole King composition Going Back, as performed by the Byrds and Dusty Springfield. A father of two and the singer-songwriter and frontman with probably the most important rock band in the world right now, if one takes into account both critical plaudits and commercial sales, Thom Yorke nevertheless still seems sometimes like the perpetual neurotic adolescent who never grew up. With fatherhood, however, has come a willingness to look outward, to address wider political and environmental issues that affect all of us, and to use his position, like Bono from U2, to try to influence those really in power in the name of the greater good. Insecure, introverted, paranoid and socially awkward he may be, but Thom Yorke is at least aware of the responsibilities we all share, and is trying to do his bit. Plus, he has one of the most remarkable singing voices of the modern era and a gift for melody and expression that is unparalleled. Whatever he turns his hand to next, be it with Radiohead or something completely different, we can be sure that Thom's take on it will be unique, thought-provoking and completely sincere.
Thank you for buying Maximum Thom Yorke. We hope you enjoyed it. Watch out for further titles on Chrome Dreams coming up soon. If you did enjoy it or have any comments or suggestions, write to us at Chrome Dreams, PO Box 230, New Malden, Surrey, UK, KT36YY, or email on mail@chromedreams.co.uk. Details of our full catalogue are listed on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk. Thanks again for listening, and goodbye for now.